Good afternoon. I'm Milton Chang of Bonsai Heirloom. Today is the beginning of March, a beautiful, sunny, cool day in California. Perfect time to repot a pine or a juniper at this time of the year. They're almost indestructible. Let me tell you a little bit about the history of this tree. This is actually, I would say, more than 500-year-old tree, although nobody really can tell you with certainty because they are dug from the mountain in a desert in California, very, very slow-growing trees. But it doesn't really matter, but it's a very old tree, so need to be very careful with it. What happened was that this tree was dug up by a couple of guys, and it was a very tall tree. And it was this branch. And I think actually this branch was not oriented this way. There are two tall branches coming up, and they both died off. And the man couldn't stand it anymore, so he sold me this tree. And I liked it because I saw this curve, and this was just tiny little leaves, not very much leaves at all. That's why he was willing to part with it. I took it, this is about 5 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, and I took it out of his mix, which is akadama, decomposed granite, and so forth, which is what the local like to use, which is really quite difficult to maintain. So I wound up putting in my regular mix. At that time, I have a source of mix of sandy loam, and I mix with peat moss, and that's pretty much it. Peat moss, redwood compost maybe a little bit, and sandy loam. And that worked fine, and with tiny few little green spots, now it's grown into this fairly green cascade tree. So let me now take it out of the pot and show what the roots, let's find out what the roots look like. My method is very simple, and I'll show you how quickly you can do things, not the complication that you might expect. So first of all, you need to take it out of the pot. And what I do is that I have this rusty jab saw, which is what people in the construction industry used for cutting sheetrocks. And so what I'll do is I'll just go around the pot to make sure it can be taken out easily. Now, I do things a little differently from the convention. I generally don't like to follow convention, but figure out what works best for me. And in this case, I actually have a layer of mosquito screen, more or less, to perform the function of what is known as root pruning, so that the roots does not curl up round and round the pot at the bottom because it's being broken up by the screen. So I'm just going around the pot. You can see I'm cutting either into the fabric or into the roots. Which is fine. And then I didn't actually put a lot of effort to anchor the tree like most people do. They will use wire to anchor to the bottom holes of the tree, of the pot. So it's fairly easy to remove. Maybe not as easy as I pretend to be, but I think this side is easier. You can see it comes right out. Well, there's lost a little bit of roots, which is fine. There's plenty more. But you can see I used the lath cross below, and the net result is that there's no roots winding around. And I don't have to change pots really 5 to 10 years or ever because there's no root issue. But you can see the soil is very loose because it's mostly sandy loam with peat moss. And the tree did just fine. So now this tool, which is almost indispensable, it's really a hook. You can buy a variety of these, including the ones you go to a restaurant supply house where they used to hook meat. That's very inexpensive, a couple bucks. And so now I comb it out as much as I can. But you can see really not much roots in addition to the ones I just broke off. But that's okay. I expect to nurture it back fairly quickly. and you will see, we will show you a video every few months to show you the progress. But that's all it really needed to sustain the tree. And frankly, the bottom part, there's nothing there. I can actually just cut it off so it not to take up any room. So here's another indispensable tool. In this case, it's a DeWalt 20-volt max. It's a battery-operated reciprocal saw. Now, I chose this one because this one you can ease in with the switch and then move a little bit rather than just full on or full off, so that I can more or less control where it goes. In this case, right now, there's a big piece of wood that's part of this tree that's really dead, which is taking up the space in the pot. So what I would do is I'll actually cut it off and to give the tree more room. So you can see this is where the tree comes down and went into the ground. And then this little branch, probably very tiny at the time, rooted a long time ago, and that became a tree. That's how most of California junipers are grown. They're pretty tall, maybe even 10 feet tall, 15 feet tall trees. And one of the branches will hit the ground and it touch the soil because it gradually sags, and then they rooted, and that became a tree, and that's this one here. Let me now try to find a pot that fits. So if you look at it, the roots is very little, but that's really enough to sustain the tree, so I have to be a little careful. So I can put it in a smaller pot. I think it's a little bit more suitable than the previous one that was intended for growing. And I think I like this pot. Let me try it just in case. Another pot as an option is a rectangular pot. I think this is actually interesting. Now the next thing I will do is I'll take this window screen. Okay, so this is a window screen material. Although this one is a little heavier duty, it's intended to put around your pet's cage. And they're fairly easy to cut, even though they're made out of fiberglass. So I cut this off from a big piece of mosquito window screen, although this is a heavier duty one. Even the lighter ones for mosquito would be just fine. And then I put it into the pot. You can see it's oversized. It was sticking up. So after I'm done, I will cut it off. So the main ingredient for my soil mixture is the sandy loam. Actually, this sandy loam is from my farm down in Pescadero, where it is rated as a prime agricultural land. So it's really fertile and also drains very well. But you can see it's quite gooey. And then you have peat moss, which is what you get at Home Depot. The stuff from Canada, sphagnum moss. And then to increase aeration, I use perlite. And I think these are probably a little bit too small. I think I should have used bigger ones, but it works. It would take at least 10 years to decompose. And the point about mix, is that I was very confused in the early days of my bonsai because everybody has their own recommendation, all the way from very expensive akadama to decomposed granite and so on and so forth. And I kill a lot of trees by following blindly what people tell me to use. I finally settled on this one for several reasons. First of all, the basic ingredients you need is something to hold the tree, hold the roots. And then the second one is you want to supply nutrient and water and air. And perlite definitely provides you the air aspect of it. And the soil holds the roots and also holds the nutrients quite well. So is the peat moss. And what I use is actually a kitchen disposable garbage bag, which is a little bit heavier than the kitchen garbage bag. And I just dump them into this. You can see the sandy loam is actually quite heavy, and you can find them in your local nursery, in the sense of a landscaping supply house. And you have to be a little careful. You don't take what I say as a rule, but rather think about it. So if your sandy loam is a little bit too clayey, then you may want to add a little bit more redwood compost to give it more aeration and drainage. So this is a very quick way of mixing the soil mix by shaking it. Actually, You turn it a few times, it's good enough. And then you can mix it further as you dump it out into the pot. So I'm trying to mix a little bit because the sandy loam, it was raining last few days, so they're all stuck together. I'd rather have it separated, but it doesn't matter if they're little lumps. That holds water better anyway, and still got the good aeration. So now I will put the tree back in. That's the front, so I need to come to the front. But when you repot it, it's an opportunity to really readjust it, everything to show its best face forward. I need to come to the front and do a little tilting until I feel like it's about right. So maybe like this angle. Okay, now I'll put the soil back in. And the point is that you should have a few extra pots around because you never know, the little nuances, subtlety that shows off the tree better with which pot. So you want to give yourself some option by buying a few extra pots when you get the opportunity to do so. You have to tuck the soil underneath. You don't have to squeeze it too hard. Do tuck it in because you can add water and then it gets really fluid, and you can then push it even further so you don't damage too much of the roots. And a lot of people use chopsticks to kind of firm the soil. I think in the process probably damage a lot of the roots. I actually don't do that. I just kind of give it a gentle shove into the bottom. And then when I put water in to water it, I would push a little bit because it's all very fluid. It would be less likely to damage the roots. And also, even if it leaves some little air space, it gives more aeration. The trees is really forgiving when you consider they grew for hundreds of years in the ground in very harsh conditions. So all this super careful about bonsai is really kind of overdoing it. It's no big deal. So now I'm just filling it in, and I have tucked in to the bottom to some degree, and then I'll do the final push down to the bottom later. But you can see it's really a 10-minute or 20-minute process to repot a fairly large, complex tree. It's really not a big deal to make a big thing about repotting as a kind of a difficult thing. Now, what you will find is that when I put water in it, much of that, some of that perlite up on top will further get flow to the top. And it's fairly ugly with the white stuff on top. But don't worry about it, because what you can do is that you can brush off the top layer a little bit, clean up a little bit, and then what happens is that when you put moss on it, the moss will eventually go over it and cover it, because that's also good medium for growing the moss. Look at every one of my trees has very good moss underneath of it, and it's pretty much with the same soil mix. Okay, that's it. Basically, that's the repotting. Now let me finish by watering it. So it's quite wet now. And then I'll try to firm it up a bit. You can see that when I push it down, it firms up quite a bit. And I try to shove it a little bit underneath of it so that the bottom is also covered in a sense of it's filled with soil. So that's it. The tree is done. Now what I can do is I can cut off the protrusion, and then I can brush off some of the white. But again, it doesn't matter. Once you put the moss on it, the moss will cover it pretty nicely. So this, in essence, is the whole repotting of this very old California juniper. So let me recap some of the points I made. It's really quite simple. First of all, you want a soil medium that contains soil or some solid material to anchor the tree, some airspace for good aeration, and some material that absorbs water to keep the water and nutrient. And so what I use is a sandy loam, 1 part sphagnum moss, and 1 part perlite. And as far as fertilizer goes, given the amount of usage is so few, so little, that I actually use either slow release like Osmocote Or a new material that's been highly recommended is really a fish emulsion with kelp in a liquid form you can also buy from Amazon. And then I line the bottom with a window screen to perform the functional root pruning, which is what professional nursery people do to prevent trees from root bound when they grow big nursery landscaping trees. And the tools you need is just really a saw of any kind to dig around the pot so that the tree can easily come off. You may or may not need the wire to anchor it down because the tree really isn't going to go anywhere. And if you move it, you always keep it upside down, and right side up anyway. And then you can cut off the window screen after you're done. And then you can remove the top layer of the perlite that looks ungainly because it's white. But again, no worries because moss will cover it very quickly. And that's it. And what I would do is I would like to keep you informed by the progress of this tree and maybe show you every 3 months its progress. Well, please like the video and subscribe to get our future update. I'd like to show you this tree every 3 to 6 months to show its progress, to show you that it really is that simple and that works. And I forgot to mention the tools you need is just really a regular pruner, just in case you'll cut very long roots, a hook to remove soil, and a knife to cut around the pot. And actually, any knife would do. This is just a inexpensive dining room knife. With that, then, it's done. Yeah, it's not bad, huh?